So tonight we're going to be doing a little bit of meditation to start. Is that okay?
Yes.
So how about we just do like 10 or 15 minutes meditation. Then we'll have a talk for maybe 40 minutes. And then we'll have an opportunity for some questions afterwards. So tonight we'll just do a very easy meditation. So it's going to be a very simple thing to do. You can just sit still and do nothing. And if you can manage that, then you're already meditating, right? And so all we need to do is to begin by just taking a comfortable posture. So if you're sitting in a chair like we all are, then just have your knees about hip width apart. And then you've got to do something with your hands, right? What are you doing with your hands? So you can either just put them in your lap, place them on your knees, whatever feels comfortable. So if you've got your knees hip width apart, then see if you can get your ankles underneath your knees a little, so you're not kind of at a funny angle. And then the last thing is the head. So you just want to gently drop your chin forward just a little bit so that the back of the neck is long. You can take your shoulders up to your ears, take them back so that you feel the chest opening and the spine is nice and straight now. We begin by taking a nice deep breath in. Breathing out the nose. Breathing in nice and deeply. And out. One more deep breath in. And out. And perhaps already you're starting to relax a little bit, to feel what it means to pause, to come to stillness, to be aware. And so we keep this process happening, this process of awareness developing. And take a few moments to check in with how you're feeling, becoming aware of what's going on in your mind. How are you feeling now? What's been happening? What are you holding on to? And so whatever it is you're holding on to, whether it's the past, some stress or tension from your week, all the busyness, all the problems, whatever it is from the past, just see if you can let it go. Release. so that you can be unburdened and free from the past. And maybe you're holding on to something in the future. Plans for the weekend. Thinking about what you'll do tomorrow morning. Worrying about something coming up next week. And to see if you can also unburden yourself of the future, releasing whatever it is you're holding on to. And so in this way, releasing the past, letting go of the future, we can be here, now. We can be present and aware. And you become aware of this body sitting here in this room. You hear the hum of the air conditioner. You feel the touch of cold from the air conditioner. You're aware of your body sitting here now. The feeling of your back against the chair. The touch of your clothes. Position of your hands. Maybe you're aware of some tightness or tension in this body that you've been holding on to. So why don't you see if you can let go? Let go of that tightness and tension. Relaxing and softening the body. Allow the face to relax. Unclench your jaw. Allow the shoulders to release in the back. Just soften. And keep relaxing down the entire body, releasing, softening. Letting go. Each and every part relaxing. It feels good to relax. It feels good to let go. And when the body is relaxed, the mind naturally becoming more calm, more peaceful. And we let go of thoughts that come and go, just as we let go of tightness, tension in the body. By releasing, by not holding on, by letting go. And when the body is relaxed and you're feeling calm and peaceful, It's so easy to see the breath. You're aware of the breath coming in, aware of the breath going out. It's so easy to watch the breath. It's soothing. It's beautiful. Calming the mind. Bringing awareness. And so go on like this, watching each and every breath coming in, each and every breath going out, breathing mindfully, being present here and now, aware but calm and peaceful. And keeping your eyes closed as we come towards the end of this short session, taking a few moments to review the process of your meditation. So ask yourself, how are you feeling now? Is it different from when you began? Were you able to let go of the past? Let go of the future? Were you able to relax? Did you become more calm? Were you able to let go of what you're holding on to? And so in this way, we start to understand the process of meditation and how to let go of suffering. And so now, when you're ready, releasing your awareness, coming back to this room, this place here, surrounded by good friends. And when you're ready, gently opening the eyes. How's everyone doing? Okay?
Great.
Good. So we always wait too long, don't we, to do some meditation? Yeah. So it's very good you've come here tonight to listen to some Dhamma. So just begin by reciting the Namo Tassa 3 times. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Puttase loka dhamme hichitang yasana kampati aso kang virajang kemang etang mangalang uttamang ti. So these words are from the Mangala Sutta, to have a mind that when touched or shaken by worldly conditions remains sorrowless, unstained, and secure. This is the highest blessing. So this is a talk about problems. Do any of you people here tonight have problems?
Too many.
Too many. How many do you have? How many is too many? Should we see who's got the most problems? No, that will take a little while, won't it? Yeah. So we all have problems, don't we? Yeah. And usually people come to a spiritual tradition because they want a solution to their problems. A spiritual solution, some sort of a hint, at least, perhaps, if not a solution, of how they can deal with their problems, how they can put their problems into a spiritual perspective. And so this is a good thing, right? We come to a spiritual tradition to see if we can understand our experience of the world in a way that gives us a bigger perspective, something that helps us see beyond the problems that we have. So for many of us, our problems are very important, and they are. They are. But have you noticed that your problems are not very important to other people? Right? So there's something that we can understand in this. That maybe our problems have to do with us, our concept of us, our concept of self, of me, my, I. So this kind of perspective is something that I want to explore tonight with you. And to begin with, I guess we have to recognize that we're pretty ordinary people, and that we come to a spiritual tradition hoping that someone has sorted it out and knows what they're doing, knows what they're talking about. So I'm not saying that's me, but thankfully we have the Buddha, our teacher, who can guide us. And when we think about the kind of perspective that the Buddha has, it's very different to the very limited, worldly, everyday, boring, mundane perspective that we might have. When the Buddha talked about problems, he saw a vast expanse of problems. We tend to see a very narrow slice as it relates to me, my problems, my world. And I can guarantee you no one else cares about that spreadsheet you're working on. No one cares about your problem with the plumbing. These things, even you will stop caring about in a little while, right? Think about all the problems you've encountered in your life that seemed so big, that seemed so important, that seemed so urgent, which now, when you look back on them, were just small and slightly irrelevant, perhaps. So we can begin to understand that perspective is something that helps us to put the things that we experience in place. In a perspective, we can see things in a way that changes the way we view those things. So think about something like this, like I hold this up to my face, it looks really big, but then I move it away, it looks really small. So when we think about the kind of perspective the Buddha had, this is also a question of view, of how he saw things. The Buddha had right view, sammaditthi. So he had insight into the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And so when the Buddha is talking about problems, the Buddha is not talking about the small problems we have here and now, although he does do that. He puts our problems into a bigger perspective. Sometimes he'll talk about this cosmos, the universe, how the universe sometimes expands and collapses. So that should put things into perspective for you, shouldn't it? Right? When you look up at the stars, you feel small and insignificant. Your problems kind of drop away. The universe is expanding and contracting, the Buddha says. This is in the Aganya Sutta. So that's a big perspective. The Buddha had a very big perspective, right? And we know when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he developed some insights that we call the Tevijjas, the three knowledges. The first, Tevijja, is the knowledge of past lives. And so again, you think you've got problems in this life? No. We've had problems in all of our past lives. And the Buddha said we have these problems going back and back and back. Countless lives. Countless sufferings in our lives going back and back and back and back. He said that he looked back as far as he could and he couldn't see any discernible beginning point. So we have been roaming about in samsara for so long, life after life after life. So again, this puts our present suffering into perspective, right? Sometimes the Buddha would talk about things like how we can conceptualize the vastness of our suffering here in samsara. One simile that we find in the Anamataka Sutta, Samyutta, is the simile of a pile of bones. This pile of bones, as high as Mount Vepula. This is a mountain in the area where the Buddha lived. He said, imagine this pile of bones, bigger than this mountain. What do you think is bigger? This mountain that we're standing on now, or the pile of bones from all of your bodies, from your past lives? And the monks are like, well, I guess we know your teaching, Buddha, so the mountain of bones is bigger than this mountain. And he said in another samyutta, what is greater, the amount of tears that you have shed through countless rebirths, or the water in the ocean. And again, the monk's like, oh, I think it must be the tears that we've shed. Isn't that horrible? What a horrible thought, the amount of tears that we have shed through the suffering of our various problems, life after life after life, that we've shed so many tears that it is greater than the water in the ocean. And this puts things into perspective, right? When we can see a big picture like this, just as the Buddha did, even just thinking about it, perhaps not apprehending it directly for ourselves, but even just thinking about it, this means that our small problems, the ones that we have every day in our lives, losing our keys, forgetting our partner's birthday, whatever it is, these small things, these are not our real problem, right? What we see here is not the real problem. The real problem, rather, is this big picture of wandering about in samsara, over and over again suffering, over and over again being born, getting old, getting sick, and dying. So another of my favorite suttas is the sutta where the Buddha runs into King Pasenadi. And King Pasenadi, of course, was a very powerful king, very rich, he had a large empire, and so he was quite busy, right? If you're a king, you have to be pretty busy, right? Because otherwise, things start to fall apart. And so the Buddha said, oh, where have you come from today? And the king replies, oh, I've been very busy. Been very busy with affairs of state that people like me have to deal with. And of course, the king thinks that he's important and that his problems are also important. And so the Buddha, perhaps wanting to give the king a larger perspective, says, what would you do, O king, if a messenger was to come to you and say, there is a giant mountain coming from the west, crushing everything in its path. And then a messenger comes and says, there's a great mountain coming from the south, crushing everything in its path. And the east and the north also, all these mountains coming, crushing everything in their path. And the king says, well, if that was the case, what else could I do but do good actions, do meritorious deeds, do things that are skillful and things that are wise? And so this, the Buddha says, is not just a mountain coming to crush you, but this is old age and death. These things are coming to crush you. That's the problem. And so the Buddha was pretty hardcore, right? It's like, you think you've got problems? You got to get old, you got to die. These are your problems. Get your priorities in order, is what he's saying. These are the true problems that we have to face in our life. Unless we confront the truths of old age, sickness, death, unless we confront the truths of rebirth and wandering in samsara, then we're never going to stop suffering. We're never going to get out of the mess that we're in. Unless we see this very clearly, just how much of a problem it is, we're not even going to have the desire to be free. And so this is why the Buddha used such powerful imagery. I mean, it's like a death metal album cover, isn't it? Bones, tears. He talks also about the amount of blood that's been spilt from you getting decapitated as a cow in your past life, as a human in your past life. This blood bigger than the ocean, again, he says. Talks about mountains coming to crush you. I mean, this is not gentle kind of imagery, right? These are harsh truths, tough love that he taught us out of compassion, so that whatever suffering that we have in this life, we can put into this much larger perspective. And by doing this, we reprioritize. Instead of dealing with the symptoms, which is the kind of sufferings we have in our everyday life, instead of just tinkering around the edges, fixing the symptoms, the Buddha instructs us to look at the cause, understand the cause, see if we can fix the cause of this suffering. And that is, of course, to gain the wisdom that leads to enlightenment, to have freedom from suffering, to never be reborn. So when you're not reborn, you can't suffer in this world. You can't get old. You can't die. So all of this, of course, can sometimes, especially on a Friday night after a busy week, can just feel a bit much, right? But it's important for us to have this larger perspective so that we can start to develop the correct view. And right view is essential to help us on our spiritual path. Right view is the forerunner of all good qualities, the forerunner of the Eightfold Noble Path that we develop in our spiritual practice. But all of that can feel a bit much. Maybe that vast perspective of universes collapsing, maybe that's too much for our human minds, ordinary human minds, to handle, too much to take on. But the Buddha didn't only talk about this vast perspective. He also talked about the everyday problems that we experience and taught us how we can see these things in a way that would develop wisdom and help us come out of suffering. And so the words I spoke at the beginning, lokadhammehi, lokadhamma, worldly condition. Sometimes this is translated as worldly winds. Have you ever heard of these? The worldly winds, the 8 worldly dhammas, the 8 worldly conditions. So these are 4 pairs, 8 dhammas altogether, 8 phenomenon altogether, that the Buddha said is worldly conditions that we experience in this world. We experience it, and also even the Arya Savakas, the noble beings, even beings who have developed their wisdom and become enlightened, even these beings experience these worldly conditions. But there's a difference between how they experience them and how we experience them. And I'll explain that in a little while. So what are these worldly conditions? 4 pairs of opposites. The first, gains and loss. So gains and loss. Gains are things we get, losses are things that we lose, right? That's the first one. Second, maybe you know them. Praise and blame, right? We know what those 2 things are. Third, fame and infamy or bad reputation. And the last is pleasure and pain. So these are 4 pairs of opposites. Let's go through them again. Gains and loss, praise and blame, fame and infamy, and pleasure and pain. So the Buddha says that all worldly conditions fit into these kind of categories, and that these worldly conditions make the world go around, and the world revolves around these worldly conditions. Our world certainly revolves around these worldly conditions, right? So let's just think about them individually for a few minutes. So gains are things that you get, like money, a job promotion, a new car, even like a new partner, the corner office, a diamond ring. These are gains, right? So we like gains, yes? We want gains, don't we? Yeah? We like it when we get the gains. But loss is when we lose that diamond ring down the sink, or lose that job, or lose that partner, or get fired from that corner office, whatever it might be. We don't like the losses, right? So you can see, do you want to save your questions for a little bit? Or get through this description of the various forms first. And so that's gains and loss. So we're attracted to the gains and we're repelled from the loss. Similarly, with something like praise and blame. We like to be praised, right? We like to be good, thought of as good. It helps us feel good about ourselves, right? When we get praised, we're happy. It gives you a sense of yourself, right? I'm a good person. I'm liked. I have these good qualities. They're mine. But blame. Blame we usually feel is not fair, is not us, is not me. That we shouldn't be blamed. So when we experience praise, we're happy. We like it. We want praise. We don't want blame. We run away when blame comes towards us, right? Both really trigger our sense of self. Sometimes when people get blamed, they experience a real emotional crisis. They become very fragile, they break down. They can't handle blame because their sense of self is hurt so deeply. Their view of themselves is hurt so deeply. And then we have reputation, good reputation, fame, and bad reputation, infamy. So we all like to have a good reputation, right? We like to think that behind our backs everyone is speaking well of us. Yeah? That they're saying nice things about us. We want to have this feeling that out there in the world, I am liked. I am spoken well of. It matters to me that I have a good reputation, right? It matters. Even though you may not even be there when people are giving you this good reputation, it still feels good to know that out there in the world, I'm well thought of. However, bad reputation, we don't like. We want to stop it. Good reputation, fine. Tell everyone. Tell as many people as you like how wonderful I am. Bad reputation, You want to stop it as quickly as you can, right? How dare they do this? How dare they say that? They're bad people, they're gossiping, they're spreading lies. They should stop. And so we run towards good reputation and we run away from bad reputation. We don't like the idea of people speaking badly about us. And the last one, pleasure and pain. So if we're really serious with these two, we see that actually we run towards pleasure, we run away from pain, and that this is basically our entire life. Running towards things that make us feel good, feel happy, running away from things that cause us pain, that make us sad. So these are the 8 worldly conditions, the 8 lokadhammas. And we could explore these in a great deal of detail, each one of these, and look at them very closely and help ourselves to understand what it means to experience these things in our daily life. I was just thinking, as I was speaking, about someone like Anwar Ibrahim, who he's basically had all of these worldly conditions, right? And not just in small amounts, but in an abundance. And do you think that when he was a bit of a golden boy, right? Many years ago, he was like 25 years ago, yeah, he was the one to watch. He had a great reputation, right? Many gains, a lot of praise, experienced a lot of pleasure. And then allegations, imprisonment, loss. Yeah, blame, bad reputation, in prison, a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And then these worldly winds, these lokadhammas that the world revolves around and that revolve around the world, these come again, change, right? Suddenly he gets gains and praise. He has a good reputation. He's just won the election. He's experiencing pleasure, right? So how long do you think it will last? The winds are always turning. The winds are always changing. Think about your own life. Even the same thing that you're praised for, other people will blame you for it. The Buddha said there is no one who is free from blame. Even the Buddha himself was blamed by people, was criticized. So if we're going to pin our hopes on these wins, like gain, praise, good reputation, pleasure, sooner or later it will change. But by the same token, if we are stuck in suffering, or we get a bad reputation, or people are blaming us, or we've lost things in our life, we have this idea that that too is permanent, right? We think those gains and praise will last forever. Doesn't. But then when we're experiencing blame and loss, we feel like this will last forever too. But it doesn't. It changes. Again, it's like that idea of perspective. We're stuck in it. We're here. This is what we're experiencing here and now. But we've lost perspective of the big picture. We know somewhere at the back of our minds that these things change. We know that that new phone that we've got could be dropped at any moment, could be stolen by thieves, and then it's gone. This thing does not last. our attitude towards it also changes. At first, we're so happy with it, and then we become bored of it, and soon we no longer think of it as something that we want to have, and we get rid of it. So the Buddha, when he talked about the worldly conditions, pointed out the drawbacks of how we usually perceive these things. And he compared us patujinas, that means like an ordinary, uninstructed worldling, just an average, unenlightened person. Someone who hasn't seen the truth of the Dhamma, who hasn't understood things like not self. So we see these things in a certain way, but the Arya Savakas, the noble beings, they don't see these things in the same way, even though they also experience these things. I just mentioned that the Buddha received blame. He was an Arya Savaka. He was an enlightened being. He also experienced pain in his back. So how does an enlightened being perceive things? So, before we get to the enlightened being, how do we perceive these things? Firstly, we don't see them clearly. When praise, blame, pain, gain, loss, reputation, infamy, when we experience these things, we don't see them as they truly are. And that is three things, the Buddha said. Impermanent, suffering, and perishable. So these are three words. So sometimes you might know anicca, anatta, dukkha. In this case, it's anicca, dukkha, viparinama, which means changing, perishable. So these things are impermanent, right? Gains, loss, both of them are impermanent. It's suffering because it changes, right? That gain changes. That's the viparinama. It's perishable, and that's why it's suffering. It's more difficult to understand why, like, loss would be, why it's not obvious that loss is suffering. I mean, it's clear, right? Yeah. Loss is also about impermanence. It's clearly suffering. We don't need to be told that, and yet sometimes when we're experiencing it, we don't understand the depth to which it is true suffering. And of course, again, it's perishable. It doesn't stay the same. So the Buddha said that these things are impermanent, they're suffering, and they are perishable or changing. But we don't see them in this way. When we get praised, we think, oh yes, it's wonderful. When we have a good reputation, yes, it's wonderful, this will last forever. But it doesn't. It's impermanent. That's why it's suffering. It changes. That's why it's suffering. And so because we don't see this, because we expect these things are permanent, we have a wrong view. We have delusion, ignorance. And so therefore, the Buddha says, we get obsessed with this thing. Our mind becomes obsessed. Intoxicated is a word that some of the translators use. We become intoxicated by gain. We become intoxicated by praise. We also become intoxicated by loss and by blame, right? It obsesses the mind over and over again, obsesses the mind. We're stuck thinking about it. We can't let go. It's here, right? We can't see it in a bigger picture that it won't be like this tomorrow, may it be like this next year, that it's changing. And because we see in this incorrect way, because we become intoxicated, we run towards pleasure, and we run away from pain. We run towards praise, we run away from blame, we run towards gain, and so on. And because of this ping pong, the Buddha says, because of that being obsessed, being attracted, being repelled, because of this, we are reborn in samsara. We're not free from samsara. Because of this, we are still going to get reborn, get old, get sick, die, and experience grief, pain, lamentation, and despair. So this is why this is how we suffer in this world, let alone that big picture of suffering, of cosmoses or countless rebirths going back and back, let alone all of those lives. Just in this life, this is the kind of suffering we experience. And so this is what often brings people into the spiritual path. They experience these things and they want to understand why. Why am I experiencing this pain and suffering? Why does it affect me like this? And so then the Buddha points out that whilst all beings experience this, the Arya Savakas, the enlightened beings, they don't experience these things in the same way. Even though they get blamed, even though they get gains, even though they may lose stuff, they don't experience it in the same way. And the difference is merely a difference of perspective, a difference of view. But it's not just like changing the way you view something, it's a very profound and deep understanding that gives rise to right view, to seeing things in accordance with reality. And so the Arya Savaka, when they experience all of these worldly conditions, they see it clearly as impermanent, as suffering, as perishable. So when people are giving things to the Buddha, he's not obsessed by it, he's not intoxicated by it. He sees this is just something that's impermanent. He doesn't get attached to it. He won't suffer if it gets lost or damaged. He understands that it will change, that it's not permanent, that it's imperishable. The same when blame came to the Buddha. He didn't get obsessed by it. He didn't try to defend himself. He just allowed this to happen, knowing that it's impermanent, knowing that its attachment to this idea of himself is suffering and that it will change anyway. So the thing that allows these enlightened beings to see clearly is that view. An enlightened being has developed some right view. At the very beginning of the stages of enlightenment, the stream enterer, the Sotapanna, they see through this idea of self, Sakaya Ditti. They see through this idea of me, mine, I. They see through that. This frees them from being attached to this idea of me. And it's this idea of me that causes us suffering. My gains, my praise, my good reputation, my pleasure. So this sense of self, seeing it for what it is, as not self, as constructed, conditioned. When an enlightened being sees like this, and they experience those worldly conditions, they don't become intoxicated by them. These things don't obsess their mind. These things don't cause them to run towards the things of gains, praise, reputation and pleasure. They don't run towards those things like we do, nor do they run away from loss or blame or bad reputation or suffering. They understand it with wisdom. And so these beings are not subject to rebirth. They're not subject to old age, sickness, death in the future. In this life, they won't suffer from coming into contact with things they don't want. They won't suffer from not coming into contact with things they do want. And so this means that they are free from suffering. And so this is the difference between someone who's ordinary like us and someone who has broken through and seen more clearly in line with the way things really are. So when we think like this, we have an ability to handle these worldly winds, these worldly conditions a little better. We have a bigger perspective to put them into. Even if we just remind ourselves, this thing that I just bought in the shops, this is not going to make me happy forever. We start to understand the drawbacks of, gains. We start to see through the glitter of things in the shops. We start to understand these are impermanent. We don't become obsessed by them. It's kind of like when you play with kids. You play the games, they give you a cup of tea, an imaginary cup of tea, and you play the game, right? You drink the tea, you give it back, but you're not convinced by it. You know it's not real. Same with these worldly conditions. We experience them, but we're not involved in the same way. We're not obsessed by them. We don't let them control us. And so in this way, we start to develop some space in between these things happening to us, and we can react and respond differently. We can respond, perhaps for the first time in our life, with wisdom. And it makes such a difference when someone blames you for something. Firstly, of course, check to see if you are to blame. And if you are, fair cop. Fine. You apologise, you try not to do it again. So we're not saying, you should never be blamed. If you've done something blameworthy, yes, we should be blamed. But we don't become obsessed by it. We don't try to fight off blame if it isn't true either. We just say, look, this isn't right, whatever, and move on. We don't need to defend ourselves in the same way. And so we learn how to see through this idea of self. And so how do we do this? Firstly, we have this intellectual understanding. We've heard this talk, we've thought about the Loka Dharmas, we've pondered the teaching a little bit, we've started to understand what the Buddha was saying about these things. So we have this intellectual understanding, which we bring into our life somehow when we experience those worldly conditions. Oh, here comes a bit of praise, won't last. Here's some suffering, doesn't last. We start to see these things more clearly. And then we start to allow these things to be seen inside ourselves and understood inside ourselves. It's like we synthesize this knowledge within ourselves. One other really useful tool is meditation. So when we see things like impermanence in our meditation, then we can apply that to other things in our life, right? That's why we contemplate impermanence, to understand the truth of impermanence, that things don't last. This is why we investigate the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, mental volitions, and consciousness. We investigate these so that seeing through this illusion of self, we don't need to respond to praise or blame in the same way that we usually do. This is why in meditation we do things like investigate the 31 parts of the body. Where is this self that we're looking for? Or we investigate the 4 elements in our body. This idea of me is conditioned, constructed. And so in this way, when we meditate on these themes, even when we meditate on themes like old age, sickness and death, things like separation or karma, the 5 frequent reflections we should do as Buddhists, in this way we develop our mind and we straighten our view. It's called ujjukaditi. We straighten our view. So at the moment, we're a little bit ignorant. We don't see things clearly. We get obsessed and intoxicated. We run towards these things. We run away from those things. Our view is crooked. So by hearing the Dharma, by pondering, by investigating, by doing meditation, we start to straighten our view. We're bringing it closer and closer into view, a view that is right view, samaditi. And so the closer we get to that true view of the nature of our existence and reality, the easier it is to understand these truths. And when we have that bigger perspective, that vast view, the things that trouble us here and now recede. You'll find that you don't suffer so much, that it's easier to bear these things, that you have a different way to look at these things. And even more important, instead of running towards these things and running away from those things, you have a new priority. Your priority is to get out of samsara, to stop the suffering at the cause and not just try to treat the symptoms. So this is a short talk about keeping things in perspective, about the Lokadhammas, and I hope that it will be of some benefit to you, and so I offer it to you tonight for your benefit. So my friend, you had a question that you wanted to ask. I'm sorry that I stopped you.
Yes, Bhante, I was just wondering that in one's lifetime, if the gains and the loss can be quantified, would they be equalized at the end of the day?
Oh, I don't know. I think it very much depends on your karma, right?
Oh.
So if you are a good person, you will get a lot of gains.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that we see when we recite something like the homage to the Sangha, the recollection of the Sangha. We say Ahunayo, Pahunayo, Dakineyo, Anjali Karaniyo. So we find that good people tend to get given a lot of things. So like the Sangha, for example, the Arya Sangha, they're worthy of gifts and they get given those gifts. We know that the Buddha was given vast tracts of land and things like that. So that's one thing. And then that they say that, people who have experienced things like loss, of course we all experience those things. So the Buddha said that trying to work out, karma will make your head split. But generally, it seems that people who do well in life have done the kind of good actions in the past that lead to success wealth, good looks, and strength and things like that. And so perhaps that's one way we can look at it. Whether they equal each other out, I'm not sure. I think it really depends on your karma. Yeah, we'll all lose like pretty much the same things. Like we'll lose loved ones, we'll get blamed, we'll experience all of those things. But in terms of gains, particularly, certainly it has to do with our karma. So if we're generous and we give and we look after others and we care about others, then we should reap the rewards of that. If we take and steal and things like that, then we'll be reborn in states of deprivation and loss. Yes?
How to overcome the outside pressure? Mean to say, like, if we go to office, we are meeting so many people and they have their own perspective about us. Because like recently I've gone through something in my office for the past 3 months, which made me even made me get disturbed in sleep.
Sure.
So like at one moment I was unable to bear it, so I spoke to my manager, and the person who was giving me that much pressure, he was asked to resign by himself. But I felt bad that I was because like I became a reason for him to get resigned.
So, I mean, it's a good question. So you're asking, how do we kind of like put this into practice in our daily life, right?
Yeah, because I feel like he has done a mistake.
Yeah.
So the company has taken took an action on him. But I became a reason, like because of my complaint, the company has taken action.
Yeah. Or was it because of his behavior that you made the complaint? So,
Yeah. So, but this is like outside pressure towards me,
yeah.
which like mentally affected me so much.
Yeah. And so when we hear these kind of teachings, remember that we're still on the path and we're not enlightened. So we are going to be, ping pong between these, gains and loss, and we're going to be intoxicated, we're going to be obsessed. And the reason that is the case is because of our view of self. And that doesn't mean that you are not important and that your mental well-being is not important and that you shouldn't have rights in your workplace, that you shouldn't have boundaries about how people treat you. This isn't to say that at all. So please don't take that message away. We still need praise, right? We still need to feel good that we're valued and loved by others. We're still going to need some good reputation, right? Otherwise, we won't get the next job, right, when they call up the referee. So these things still matter. That's why the Buddha said that this is the kind of stuff that the world revolves around and that revolve around the world. This is the kind of stuff that's always pushing us, pushing others, pushing, like the wind pushes. The wind's always moving around the world, creating weather systems. And so we're still going to experience these things, but how we experience them, that's the difference. And so it might be that the next time you have a problem at work, you might approach it differently somehow. You might approach that person. You might be unafraid of them saying a bad word about you and you being able to say, look, this thing has to stop. It could be that that's a different way that you might handle it. But the most important place that we see this stuff is in our meditation, that we understand it, even afterwards. Like when you reflect upon what happened, you can see, okay, this is what happened, this is why it happened, this is how it felt for me, this is how it felt to have blame, and how would it feel for that person to have that bad reputation now? That's how that would be. I understand that. So we start to just investigate a little bit, and we can start to break down the unthinking, habitual response that happens in our mind that wants to protect this self. So we start to break it down. But we see it in meditation, and that's very useful to see it clearly. It doesn't mean that once you get off the cushion that you just allow people to treat you badly and things like that. But it's something that is like it's like in baseball, you know, there's like a catcher who catches the ball when someone swings the bat. You know, they're behind the bats person. Someone throws a ball, and sometimes we'll hit it. We'll hit that ball, and sometimes it'll just go through, and the person behind will catch it. And so this is kind of, I'm not sure it's a very good analogy, but this is what that knowledge is like. You know, sometimes if we don't hit that ball, this knowledge will come and kick in and say, hey, I've got you, you know. Sometimes when we hit that ball, it sets off a whole chain of events. So we're still going to experience these things, but we develop wisdom to see them more clearly. We don't try to change this stuff from happening. We just see it more clearly. And it's that perspective that gives us some more space in our mind.
I know I am not like very disciplined in following the meditation, but whenever I get time, I try to practice the meditation.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
But how I can do it daily, means without giving any excuse.
Yes. Oh, you have to have a stern talking to yourself. The way I have been told by my teacher, Bhante Sujato, he taught me this years ago, and I thought it was great advice because it was just very practical and doable. So he said, just meditate 10 minutes a day for 5 days a week. Don't try to do 7 days a week. If you try to do 7 days and you can't do it, you'll feel bad and you'll just stop completely, right? So give yourself 5 days a week. That way, if you miss a day, you can do it tomorrow. Sensible, yeah? So you start with 10 minutes. If you can do 10 minutes, that's great. Maybe after a few weeks of doing 10 minutes, you do 15. Maybe you've got 20 minutes available. So I think that's one way to do it. The other way is to take the time to do retreats. Give yourself that opportunity to do a retreat. The reason is when you do a retreat, it's a period of intensive meditation practice. And so you're getting much more time to meditate. Your meditation is almost continuous. And so you get the depth of practice that comes from meditating a lot. So the secret ingredient for meditation is time. You need the time for the meditation to develop. And so it takes time. So you give yourself the time of retreat. And then when you meditate for a little bit, you'll see why meditation is so powerful. You will be reminded, this is really special. This is really important. This helps me feel good. It helps me see more clearly. It gives me wisdom. This is something I want to prioritize in my life. And then when it comes to finishing the retreat, you go home and you may not be able to maintain that level of practice, but you'll have that memory. This works. This helps me. And that will help you to want to practice. So yeah, that's important. For those people who have never done a retreat, I really encourage you to do one because you'll see the power of the mind. And once you see that, you can never go back. You can never unsee it. When you see it, you're like, it will make sense to you. This is why the Buddha recommended, even for lay people, that we take this opportunity to practice. And once you see that, you'll also understand how meditation gives you a much bigger perspective. And it's the tool that allows us to have some space in between experiencing these worldly conditions and that response. It's the tool that chips away at our ignorance so that we can get closer and closer to the truth. So meditation is a really powerful thing, and we need to be reminded just how powerful it is. So that's why retreats are really special. Then we bring that into our daily life, that memory. Yeah. Let's see if someone else has a question. Yep.
Yeah, Bhante. So actually I have a question. It's like when I done meditation, right, then I went very in depth that I know about myself. So being in the corporate world, there's a lot of things that you cannot do too straightforward. So sometimes I want to do something and I can see what other people are doing. So sometimes there's a struggle when you know yourself too much and then you know that there's only so far that you can go because you can't do what other people are doing in certain ways.
So are you talking about things like ethical concerns?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's really great that you can see this in yourself and this struggle in yourself. You know why it's really good? Because it means you're a good person. People who are unethical, they don't have this concern. Am I doing something ethical? They don't think about that. It's not something that bothers them. It doesn't keep them awake at night. Good people are troubled by ethical dilemmas. Good people worry about these things. And so, firstly, you should feel happy. You know that you're a good person. Secondly, your ethical conduct is really important, not just for this job, but for your entire life. And also, our ethical conduct affects our future rebirth as well. So it's really important to have an ethical framework, whatever that ethical framework is for you or for your profession. Stick to those ethical guidelines. Stick to your ethical guns, so to speak. This is really important. This is what separates us from bad people, from people who do bad things, from people who end up experiencing a lot of suffering in this life and in the future. Because when people are unethical, they harm themselves and they harm others. So if you're in the kind of environment where you can no longer be ethical, then I would recommend you change profession. If you're doing things, if you're worried about doing things that compromise your ethics, then you cannot do it. You will suffer a lot. You will suffer a great deal when you break your own ethics. So you're the first person who will suffer, and who knows who may suffer as a result of unethical conduct. And so it's very important that you know yourself, that you know your ethical system, and that you can articulate it when you need to. And so if there's a situation where something is happening that you're uncomfortable with, then take some space, get away, take some deep breaths, examine it, see what your options are. Usually there's a way for us to not engage in ethically dubious conduct. So, yeah, I'm not sure about the specifics of your situation, but be really careful. You know, you have to live with this. You have to live with yourself. So be careful with ethical conduct. And nothing is worth sacrificing your ethical conduct over. No amount of money, no amount of promotion, not even the corner office. You know, it's not worth it in the big picture. Yeah.
Chances are in this kind of environment, you'll be like pressurized to join them. So if you don't join them, you'll be ostracized. So it will mean that your ability to perform in your work will be affected. So what do you see, or what do you comment?
Yeah, I mean, the Buddha said that this spiritual path goes against the stream. And the Buddha said that this is an upside down world. You know, the things that people think are permanent are impermanent. The things that people think are pleasurable are unpleasurable. And these are things that we kind of grapple with when we're on the spiritual path. So sometimes you look at the world and you think, this world's crazy, you know? Everything's wrong. Everything's problematic. Everything's unethical. And we have to find a way to kind of swim against the stream, but not become tired and stop and drown, you know? But it's possible to find a way. And all throughout history, even at the time of the Buddha, people also had these kind of ethical problems, ethical dilemmas. People also had social pressure. And I guess when we're looking back from our vantage point at history, we can see, oh, that person, you know, they were unethical, and this led to this thing happening, and this thing happening, this thing happening. And we despise them for it, right? And sometimes we look back and we see people who resisted, and we think, gosh, that's an inspiration. That was someone who was rock steady in their ethical conduct, who refused to be peer pressured or cajoled or forced into doing something that was harmful. And so we need to examine ourselves, and we have to live with our knowledge of our ethical conduct. And this is the kind of stuff that comes back to us and haunts us. And this is the kind of stuff that will influence our view of self in the future, and perhaps influence our mind. You know, when we're passing away, we have these regrets, remorse, things that we've done. We want to have a mind that's as pure and spotless as we can, and we want to do as many good things, develop strong ethical conduct, so that this is how we feel our mind is bright, pure, and spotless. You had a question? And then maybe last one? Yep.
Yeah. Just can I add to that?
Sure, yeah. It's probably, it could be a good idea for a talk about ethical conduct in the corporate world. Yeah.
Yes.
Buddhist ethical conduct.
Because most of us are working people.
Yeah.
So all these issues are quite common.
Yep.
Yeah. Sadhu. I just want to share my experience based on the question that our sister mentioned.
Okay.
I was in corporate, very high position, and I think I mentioned to Bhante last week, early this year I just quit my job. Good money, same. On the spot, I lost my BM, I lost everything, because everything belongs to the company.
Not the BM.
I just give it back. Yeah, I just give it back to the company, and I feel happy. Until today, I still have not got a job. It's not that I don't want to find a job. I just want to take a break, and I wanted to go more into the Buddhism path.
Yeah.
So this is what I wanted. So if you can afford it, actually, I think Bhante have given that advice that, if you can afford it, actually you should look for another job. If you think that is not ethical, and walk out from that.
And sometimes these ethical problems kind of they're just like a little spurt, and then they disappear, and you can just get on with your job. And I'm not advocating that people should just be quitting and storming out of the offices. Please don't kind of make some big Buddhist revolution at the corporate end of Kuala Lumpur.
You say Bhante say that.
But what's interesting about this, again, is the Lokadharmas and our view of self and who we are. I'm a corporate office worker. I was a corporate office worker too, right? But there's many other yous. There's many other lives inside of you. And sometimes we get stuck in this version of ourself. sometimes we get stuck in fear of these worldly conditions changing. We get stuck in fear of the gains that we've made being lost, the praise that we have getting lost, the reputation we have being ruined. We live in fear of pain. But actually, these things are all bearable, believe it or not. And even if the worst thing happens and you get fired and they take away your BM or they throw your stuff out in the street or whatever, you will survive. Because these are just worldly conditions. And who knows what kind of person you can become after that. There's one famous, and I'll just finish with this little story from the time of the Buddha about Bhante Akaliko Putta, and I think that's right. He used to be a king, and he gave it all up. He used to be a king. He had treasures, he had guards, he had dancing girls, he had the whole shebang. And he said that when he had these things, he was suffering all the time. You know, he couldn't sleep because he was afraid that people were going to come and murder him in his sleep or try to steal his treasure. He was always worried. You know, he had guards protecting his bedchamber. He had guards protecting his treasure. He had guards protecting his harem. And he never had a moment's peace, despite being wealthy and having all of these wonderful worldly conditions. And something went wrong. I can't remember what went wrong in the story, but eventually he became a monk. And then he's sitting alone in the forest in a simple little hut, and he's sitting there and he's saying, "Oh, what bliss, aho sukham, aho sukham." And he's experiencing such happiness, but people walking past think, what is he up to in there? They think he might be doing something unmonk-like, perhaps, saying, "Oh, what bliss, oh, what bliss." And so they go and report him to the Buddha. So the Buddha says, "Bring him to me." So they bring him to him, and the Buddha says, "Is it true that you were saying, oh, what bliss, oh, what bliss? Why were you saying that?" He says, "Yes, it was true, yes, it was true. Because I'm so happy. Before, I had so much and I was suffering. But now, being a simple monk, living in the forest, I experience bliss." And so this story shows that even when we have everything we need and we may not experience happiness, and that we can let go of those things, that they don't define us, that our happiness is not dependent upon these things. And for me, sometimes I see people, they come to me and, you know, I'll be doing like a 10-day meditation retreat, and they'll come and this is a chance to talk about meditation, and they'll talk to me about their problems at work. And I'm kind of like, "Oh, you poor things. You know, like this is really impacting your mind, right? This is really impacting who you think you are. And you'll suffer when it changes. You know, this person that you think you are is just held together like an illusion. Your high-flying corporate lifestyle is vulnerable. This illusion is fragile, and it could change at any moment. Something could be taken away from you. Someone could have a problem with you, and the whole thing just... What are you going to do? Who are you without that corner office? Who are you without the BMW? Sometimes it's good to find out who you might be if you weren't defined by these things. This is something we get when we go on holidays, like, wow, all these things that define me in my usual life, they're not here. Who am I? I feel free. This is also something we can get on retreat. Those things that define you, your clothes, your makeup, your status, whatever. No one knows anything about that stuff there. Who are you? And this is why it's important to reflect upon these things, to understand how conditioned, how vulnerable our sense of self is, and to see it more clearly in line with reality. But anyway, we should finish up there. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So good night, everyone. Take care, safe driving, be well.